Good morning. It is a gorgeous day out there today, so I'm going to do some gardening bits. I'm just recording in here first because John is already outside with the strimmer running and it's quite noisy and annoying and obnoxious. So he's strimming the meadow at the bottom of the vegetable plot, probably the last cut of the year. So yeah, it's a bit noisy out there. I need to pick blackberries this morning. I have to wade through a bramble thicket to get them. We have cultivated blackberries rather than wild blackberries, so they don't kind of overrun the garden as such, but they haven't been pruned for a couple of years. They've kind of been neglected. So I think I'll be going in not just with a bowl but also with a pair of secateurs, and I think I'll have to prune as I go because otherwise I'm just not going to be able to get through. They are growing between the barn wall and the greenhouse, the big greenhouse, so there isn't a lot of space, and yeah, they're completely overgrown. And whatever else takes my fancy out there in the garden today. Hi, what are you doing up there? Hello. I've managed to get a good bowl full and scratch myself to bits. My hands are covered in blackberry juice and probably many tiny thorns, but I'll deal with that once I get in the house. That took quite a bit longer than I was expecting. It took me an hour and a half to break through, cut through and collect the blackberries. So they need picking over later on. But I've had some lunch now. I had a lovely cheese and beetroot sandwich. So just trying to find something to do out here today. The weather's so nice and there is zero wind, which is not very common in Orkney at this time of year. And it feels really warm, so it would be a shame not to be outside. But because we've had such a terrible vegetable growing season, would normally be quite busy getting in the last of the stuff, but there isn't really much to come in. So all the stuff in the garden to do is all like really boring stuff, like things like, well, actually I quite enjoy pruning, but mostly just maintenance things, weeding, that sort of thing. I think I'm going to do some of the never-ending task of making firewood. We have two solid fuel stoves, and the one in the living room generally only uses wood except when it's really cold, but that one gets lit every day as opposed to the main central heating one, which in the winter months will be kept on overnight. So it's a case of needing kindling for lighting the fire in the living room every morning. And also, so I like to make kindling and what I like to call middling wood, which is that kind of midway between kindling and logs. Something in the middle for the logs to catch fire from, because the kindling will burn out too quickly. I'm babbling today. So I'm going to make some more kindling. We make all our own kindling from our own tree prunings. So any tree pruning that we do, all of the wood gets sorted into like logs, middle-sized wood and twiggy stuff, and everything gets separated out and then dried for several months, and then once they're nice and fully dry, then they can all be broken up or cut up depending on how thick they are, and stored in the woodshed. So I think I'm going to make up another empty feed bag full of kindling, ready for the winter. This is what we use for our woodshed. It is getting quite empty now. It was our old potting greenhouse until we built the new big one. So this is all we have left from last year. We have some larger logs, some smaller logs, some middling sized wood, and all these old feed bags that are full of kindling that I've made from twigs. But I did get attacked by spiders when I came in here. They're not terrible spiders. We don't have terrible spiders in Orkney. There was just many of them all on the ceiling, and I didn't realise when I walked in, and I probably have my hair full of spiders now, which is gross because I don't like spiders. This building at the back of this plastic lean-to is marked down on the old 70s plan as air raid shelter. So I'm assuming this was built during the war for doing air raids. It is all steel reinforced stone and concrete, and was here well before this lean-to greenhouse was built on here. And yeah, now it used to be my potting shed, but now it just gets used for storing junk and feed bags and bags of kindling and so on. But it is getting very empty in here now, so we're going to have to cut up some more logs for next year. I've come in to cool off for a little while. I'm trying to knit, but my hands are quite sore from breaking branches up, but I'll not let it stop me from knitting. It is quite warm out there. It's too warm for people who are used to it being around 12 degrees Celsius, and today I think it's more like 20, which doesn't sound very hot. In fact, I think it's probably hotter than that because it's so still. But when you're not used to it, it's particularly hot. But at least I got another bag full of kindling made up. I think a bag will last about, I don't know, a couple of weeks. So it's worth doing, that's for sure. I'm just working on my stripy Halloween socks. They're not very striped. I've only done the toe on the second sock compared to most of that one. Yesterday's apple pie was disappointing. It was definitely a long way from my best apple pie. It needed more sugar in the apples. They're a little sharp, and I'd made the mistake of not putting my pastry in the fridge to chill before rolling it out, so when I was trying to put it on top of the pie, it was too soft, and I was quite tired at that point, and I couldn't get my fingers to work properly to crimp the edges of the pie, and that coupled with the pastry being so soft, and it just looked a mess. And it tasted nice, the pastry that is, but the apples really sharp. It'll be fine. It'll have mellowed out a bit today, and I'll make some bird's custard up to go with it. I think that'll help neutralise the acidity in the filling a little bit. The soup, on the other hand, was one of the best leek and potato soups I've made. I'm not sure why. Sometimes it just works out that way, even though you kind of do the same, basically the same thing all the time. There's always little changes, you know, different amounts of stock, or different, you know, depending upon the leeks and things like that. So definitely one of the best, and the bread was fantastic. Apart from the paper that I had used to put the bread on to bake it in, I thought it was greaseproof paper. It was not. So normally I would use a ripped off sheet of greaseproof paper, but often because it's kind of square, it will stick into the dough as it rises, and then you're struggling to get those creases out once the bread is baked. So this time I thought I'd be clever. I used a round cake case, but I think I must have put some into an older container because it was labelled as greaseproof, but it was definitely not, because some of them are and some of them are just paper, and I hate those ones because they stick to your cakes as well. You have to kind of grease them, which kind of defeats the object. You may as well just use greaseproof paper. So I thought I was being clever and I wasn't, and it completely stuck to the bottom of the bread. So I spent quite a bit of time peeling off as best I could the paper, and where I couldn't, basically ripping off the crust bottom of my bread. I don't mind eating, you know, a little bit of paper that might get in there, a tiny bit, but not just like the complete coating of my crust being paper. That's not very nice. So anyway, I managed to fix it best I could, but the bread itself was delicious. In fact, I wish in some ways I'd added a little bit more caraway seed, but the texture of it was perfect. Really happy with it. So we will be having more leftover soup. We will be having leftover soup for tea tonight, and more of that bread as well, and more of the apple pie. The advantage of making something that's a big batch or a large item, like a large dessert, it will last for several days, and it means I don't have to cook tonight. All I have to do is warm that pan of soup back through, which I like nights like that. I like evenings where I don't have to cook an entire dinner again. So I'm just going to do a little bit of my knitting, and I think I might go make a cup of tea actually whilst I'm in. It's a bit warm out there for me, but parts of the house are quite cool. It's quite nice in here, but it's a bit cool in the living room. I will have to put the fire. It seems silly on one of the hottest days of the month, when it's one of the nicest days we've had in weeks, and I'm going to have to put the fire on in the living room because that room gets quite cold. We have quite thick stone walls, and we don't get any kind of passive solar heat in that room because it is north facing. Well, it's north and west facing, so it doesn't really get any sun until late in the evening, so it doesn't get warmed up. Whereas this room, we have an east facing window and a south facing window, so this room, unless it's a cold winter's day, then it gets, you know, a sunny day, it gets warmed up a bit, and the rest of the house gets warmed up through the slate roof and things like that. But the living room, that one's a cold room, even in the summer. There are summer evenings where sometimes I have to put the fire on in there too, especially this one. This past summer it has been wet and dull and not pleasant at all, but yeah, so I'll have to put the fire on in a little while. But I think it's a cup of tea time. I'm not sure how much more I'm going to get done today outside. Like I said, there isn't an awful lot of specific tasks you can pinpoint down. It's all just a case of tidying for the winter, like weeding out the weeds out of the veggie boxes and covering them over for the winter, or we need to mark out where we're going to plant some willow trees this over the next few months, things like that. But there isn't really, you know, a job that you can kind of get stuck into. There isn't things like, oh, let's go harvest all the apples because they're not ready yet, or let's go I don't know, dig potatoes, that sort of thing. And we try to keep the garden side of the garden just mostly self-reliant, low maintenance basically. If it can't look after itself, it can't stay in our garden basically, because we have quite a large garden and it's too much to manage. Okay, I'm going to go up and put the kettle on, I think. I'm not sure how much more footage there will be today, but we shall see. I don't know what else I want to do yet.